Hi, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us here today for this session on critical thinking in the workplace. For those who don't know me, my name is Vincent Romano. I look after clients over here in Singapore. I've been with Arcadia for 3 years. For those who don't know Arcadia, we call ourselves architects of change. And by that, we mean we are about changing culture in companies, about increasing people capability, predominantly in 3 areas for communication, leadership, and mindset. And one of the programs in our mindset pillar is critical thinking, which we're here to talk about today. Now, joining me today is one of our master facilitators, David Watling, who's based here in Singapore. So I'll pass you over to David, who will tell you a little bit more about critical thinking. Thank you very much, everyone.
And a very warm welcome to everybody today to our critical thinking session. It's nice to see some familiar faces on the call. If we haven't met already, it's great to meet you, even if it's just in a virtual session today. So perhaps we should begin by setting some context. Why did we ask you to join a critical thinking session? Well, critical thinking, it's an essential skill that we really hear our clients speak about more and more. And we've noticed that people are increasingly seeing it and referring it to it as a future skill. In fact, in the Future of Jobs report from the World Economic Forum, they identified analytical thinking and creative thinking as the two top in-demand skills for 2024. And you might have seen recently in Forbes, it also listed critical thinking in their top 10 in-demand skills for the future workplace. So one of the questions that we get asked most often is, can critical thinking be taught? And our point of view on this is 100% yes. So as Vincent was saying, we see critical thinking through the lens of mindset, but it's also a skill set. And the mindset component includes maybe challenging our beliefs and biases, not being afraid to be wrong, being open and even curious to hear other people's points of view, and seeking out differing perspectives. And the skill set of that includes a whole suite of communication and thinking tools that we can employ to actually apply critical thinking out there in the real world. So both mindset and skill set, there are lessons to be learned for us as individuals, for us as managers of teams and functions in a business, but also for leaders of an organization as well. And it's worth noting that many of our clients around the world have expressed concerns that they don't want to send people into some dry academic workshop that's full of theoretical ideas from dusty old books. And so our design team were really excited to take on this challenge of bringing the learning to life in a really fun and engaging way. And so, whilst we really want to ensure that learners walk away with a toolbox full of practical tools and skills, we want to do that in an experiential learning manner. So I guess my job today over the next few minutes next almost hour or so is to try to bring this to life and showcase some of the talents in our design team as well. So hopefully I'll be able to do that. And my intention really is just to provide a taster of a full one-day workshop, which we usually provide in face-to-face setting. So before we proceed, let's take a big picture look at perhaps what learners walk away with at the end of the day. Okay, so the full one-day workshop follows a kind of a framework that we call DRAW. And this approaches critical thinking with a real business and pragmatic sort of setting. And so for some of the more experienced people on the call, they'll perhaps notice that this is based on the work of Watson and Glaser, and it's aligned with Pearson's best practice approach to what's used in an academic setting. But the real difference is we've baked in those crucial linkages to make sure it's practical and it's contemporary and it makes sense in that complex, rapidly changing business environment that a lot of learners need to apply these tools in. So what is DRAW? Well, first of all, it's by defining the issue, because we really want clarity on what problem are we solving for? Are we looking at the same problem? Is your view and my view, as we talk across the meeting room table, are we looking at the same issue? And then we can move on to recognizing assumptions, because in business, just like life, there are always a lot of blind spots. There are also a lot of kind of unconscious thinking that might lead us to have these biases and assumptions. And then we're going to move into analyze the arguments. And this is the core, this is the real meat on the bones of critical thinking, where we can dig deeper and really ensure the evidence around our arguments is robust, and analyze the strength of other people's arguments as well. And that allows us to then move into working out implications, so we can arrive at our conclusions and check to see how they would play out as we execute them in a business. So the draw framework, just as an FYI, it does have a suggested order, but it's not necessarily a completely rigid and linear progress. So sometimes we might analyze an argument, and then that might lead us to identify new assumptions, and we need to go back and reconsider that, so we can kind of move back in the process, and we go back and forth, and this becomes more and more frequent as we see learners becoming more fluent and familiar and comfortable with the tools. So today we're just going to dip into our toe into one of these areas. We're going to look into analyzing arguments, and we're going to look at arguments not necessarily as conflict, but it's assertions that are intended to persuade someone to believe or act in a certain way. So evaluating arguments is really the process of analyzing those assertions objectively and accurately as well. So the big question is, what does a critical thinker even do then? Well, number one, she analyzes that argument and the reasoning or supporting evidence really thoroughly. And number two is that she explores those counter arguments, even when doing so is controversial, even when there's the tendency that we might move into groupthink. So before we proceed, let's take a look at some simple questions to help us reflect on our own thinking patterns, rather than get too sucked into too much of frameworks and models and things. So we've got a little bit of a surprise pop quiz for you, a little bit of a test. And these questions that I'm about to share with you are part of a scientifically validated test, actually used by medical professionals and doctors to assess brain function. Now, I'm not a qualified medical professional, so we'll leave it at that, but I'm going to give you one question at a time. Okay, let's get into it. And remember, I'm not a doctor, so we're not here to assess your brain function. It's just about your thinking skills. Okay, question one. A bat and a ball cost $1.10, but the bat costs $1 more than the ball. So how much does the ball cost? I'm going to give you 20 seconds. All right, going to move on to question number two. So if it takes 5 machines 5 minutes to make 5 widgets, I don't know what widgets are, but whatever they are, how long would it take 100 machines to make 100 widgets? Again, grab your pencil, just write down your answers on your own bit of paper. I'm going to give you another 10 seconds. All right, question number 3. In a lake, there is a patch of lily pads. So every day the patch doubles in size. And if it takes 48 days for the patch to cover the entire lake, how long would it take the patch to cover half the lake? Again, record your last answer on your piece of paper. I'm going to give you 10 more seconds. So well done you in taking the test. And as I said, this is a very well-known, scientifically validated test in the psychology and in the healthcare field. And some of you might recognize the answers, some of the questions, sorry, from thought leadership from various different authors and different sources as well. So let's have a look at some answers. Okay, so question number 1, a bat and a ball cost $1.10 in total. The bat costs $1 more than the ball. How much does the ball cost? So the correct answer is 5 cents. All right. So if you got 5 cents for question number 1, well done you, pat on the back. So some of you might have read Daniel Kahneman's book, Thinking Fast and Slow, and you'll remember that question. It's a really interesting question that triggers a part of our instinctive thinking. So often people feel very, very strongly that they know the answer. If you answered 10 cents, let's just think through the logic of that. Although it feels the right answer, it's very instinctive. It's using that kind of primal, emotional, instinctive part of our brain. But if you take a 10 cents ball and you add on the cost of the bat, which costs $1 more, so 10 cents and $1.10, total $1.20. So although it feels like the right answer, it's actually not going to allow you to solve to $1.10. So good on you if you got 5 cents for question number 1. Okay, question number 2. If it takes 5 machines 5 minutes to make 5 widgets, how long would it take 100 machines to make 100 widgets? So the answer for this one is 5 minutes. So every machine is going to take 5 minutes to make 1 widget. So 5 machines take 5 minutes to make 5 widgets, and 100 machines take 5 minutes to make 100 widgets. But again, instinctively, we might not come to that logical answer where it requires us to engage a different system in our brain to work through that logic and executive function in the frontal cortex of our brain. Okay, so finally, question number 3. In a lake, there's a patch of lily pads. Every day the patch doubles in size. If it takes 48 days for the patch to cover the entire lake, how long would it take for the patch to cover half the lake? Now, instinctively, it feels like 24 days. But the correct answer again is 47 days. So if on day 47 the patch covered half the lake, overnight it would double in size, and on day 48 it would cover the full lake. But again, it's instinctive thinking, that very rapid emotional thinking that tends to happen with our gut feeling tends to take over when we see questions like this. So irrespective of how many points you scored, you probably want to know, what does that test really reveal about critical thinking? Well, the overarching message of all of this is, well, we need to slow down our thinking. We really need to make the effort to overcome that instinctive knee-jerk response that happens in that much more primal part of our emotional brain. And in business, at work, when we're sitting around the meeting room table, critical thinking challenges are much more complex than these relatively simple maths problems, which is why critical thinking is so essential if we're going to grow an organization or avoid costly mistakes. And so I mentioned this is a really well scientifically validated test. And of a survey of, I think it was about 3,400-ish respondents, around about 33% missed all 3 questions wrong. So if you didn't get them all correct, don't beat yourself up. Most people, 83% of that fairly reasonable group of over 3,000 people missed at least one of the questions. And question number 1 is the one that most people missed most often. And often people report that they instinctively felt that their answer of perhaps 10 cents, and they felt they were very, very confident that they were correct. So it's interesting that not just does that instinctive thinking kick in, it actually makes us feel more strongly about our answer and feel less inclined to listen to other point of views. So interesting stuff here that perhaps we can go into if we have more time. But our learning objectives really is we want everybody to walk away with more than just an enhanced understanding of critical thinking. We want them to really be able to evaluate arguments by assessing the strength of reasoning and the evidence that people present. And that's going to be our focus on this little taster today. Unfortunately, we're not going to be able to go through all of the depth of the one-day program. So we're just going to dip our toe in the water and give you that feeling for what would it be like for a learner in a full program. And so let's maybe jump into a different activity. And another quick one, perhaps. What word comes to mind when you hear the term critical thinking? So if somebody came to you in the business and said, right, we really need to improve our critical thinking, what comes to mind? So here comes some answers. Coming to solutions, problem solving, being more strategic, being able to see things from different perspectives, perhaps uncovering blind spots. And this is not a new idea. You know, critical thinking dates back over 2,400 years. So think back to the first philosophers, people like Socrates. They began the study of philosophy by asking endless questions. And, you know, Socrates really considered a conversation that ended in everybody realizing how little they knew about something was a real success for him. And so there's a quote, you know, it's far better to know, to carry on, it's far better to carry on believing that you understood very little about something than to be confident that you do. So let's look at our understanding of critical thinking and think about ways where we can see things from different perspectives. And so what is critical thinking? Well, it's pretty complicated, but in psychology, it's really defined as a metacognitive process. So that's really about metacognitive thinking about our thinking. Right. So it's about being able to zoom up and test perhaps our own arguments and testing maybe to see what our own biases and our assumptions might be. And in kind of a neuroscience perspective, critical thinking is where that logical part of our brain, that frontal cortex, the bit that we rely on for good judgment, it's that part where that really has to perhaps create some balance with that implicit system, that habitual, instinctive gut feeling that we sometimes rely on when our emotions drive our responses and reactions. So in neuroscience, we were able to actually look inside people's brains with MRI scanners or PET scanners. A positron electron tomography allows you to see blood glucose being used, and it allows you to see oxygen being consumed as we use different parts of our brain to think. So in our kind of one-day program, we want to create a space for our learners to really draw upon that framework to improve their critical thinking skills, to apply it in almost all situations. And that's pretty diverse, but often people come back and say it's all about making better quality decisions. So being more objective about weighing the costs and benefits of problems, being able to solve complex and sometimes ambiguous or even ill-defined problems, where half the battle is just being able to agree on what the problem really is and coming up with a shared understanding of the problem statement. And then that's going to allow us to go into root causes and not just look at the symptoms and figure out, you know, what's going on inside the business. But also it's this piece around creative thinking and innovative ideas. And in the program, we look at, you know, the ability to come up with game-changing ideas in either an iterative improvement. So those are those small, constant improvements that we need to make in the business to do things more efficiently or to save costs or to do things faster. Or sometimes those giant leaps, those game-changing, innovative ideas, and look at things from a different way. And often people have their own mindsets of saying, oh, I'm good at logical thinking, but I really struggle with creative thinking. And so in the program itself, we use the DRAW framework to kind of unpack and build a broader set of skills. So let's jump into this element of the DRAW framework that we want to explore with you together here and look at analyzing arguments. And so perhaps first we can define, what do we even mean by arguments? And as I said before, this is not necessarily about arguments meaning conflict or friction, but in our point of view, arguments are everywhere. They're in the workplace, they're in the media, they're even in our personal lives. Not as conflict, but as in trying to get other people to buy into our point of view, or other people are trying to influence us to maybe support their recommendations or see things from their point of view. And they're really designed to influence opinions and people's decisions. So as critical thinkers, it's our job to evaluate these arguments and really determine if they are well supported or if they're flawed. So whether that's the argument coming from a colleague or a politician or our teenage kids, being able to be a critical thinker is that skill that's going to be applied in all sorts of contexts. So let's have a look at arguments. I wanted to focus on this today because it's a key step that involves breaking down people's messages into some fundamental components and examining that reasoning and really having a look at perhaps how strong is it. And in a full one-day program, of course, we'll have plenty of time to kind of dig into this. But some basic structure here is that arguments break down into two fundamental components. So forgive me, broad brushstrokes here. But for the point of just the taste of the day, two fundamental components. So first of all, there's some sort of conclusion or an ask. They're trying to persuade us to do something, yeah, or buy into something at least is the yes that they're looking for. And that's the main point or idea that the person is trying to persuade us to accept. Yeah, that's the what of the argument. I want you to vote for me. I want you to look at my priorities and give them precedence over your priorities. Or I want you to maybe allocate budget or resources here, but not there. But behind that conclusion, there's also some reasoning. There's the reasons to support that conclusion. And that's the why of an argument. So let's have a look at a couple of simple arguments here. So the first one is perhaps a fly on the wall of any meeting where we hear somebody say, look, we need to invest heavily in social media advertising. It's where our target audience is. Every successful brand is doing this as well. If we don't jump on this trend, we're going to get left behind. Okay, so let's see if we can identify what is the ask. What do they want us to do here? Okay, that's going to be the conclusion and separate from the reasoning. So I'm just going to give you 10 or 15 seconds of quiet thinking time. Just look at the first statement. Okay, so let's have a look, see if we can separate out the ask, the conclusion. In the top one here, you can see that the blue is we want to invest here, but not there. In this case, social media advertising. That's what the request is. And then the premise or the reasoning is sat behind that in the kind of the pink color as well. And so this basic structure is seen. Let's have a look at the second one and see if we can separate out the ask from the reasoning. If that was me knocking on your door and saying, hey, boss, have you got 2 minutes? I know what the numbers are. They're not what we want to be, but look, I've been working so hard. I'm always volunteering. I'm the first in the office. It's been a tough quarter, but I deserve a raise. And so some of the logic, the structure of my argument maybe isn't actually building that strong case. And there's some logical fallacies in there. There's some reasoning that doesn't really support my case. So we're going to look at these logical fallacies. And again, well, let's have a bit of interactivity. I'm going to play just a short clip of audio, just perhaps 20 seconds or so. And I'd like you to listen to an argument and perhaps think about what the logical fallacy might be. Where does my argument break down and why does it break down? Why is it so weak? So let's have a look at, we might not have time for 5. Maybe we'll just do 2 or 3, but let's listen to the first one together. You ready? Here we go.
This software has many bugs, but we just paid a lot of money for it. It would be such a waste not to continue using it at least until the end of the financial year.
All right, so the software has got a lot of bugs, but we've already paid for it. Let's at least use it until next year when we've got a new budget. I'm going to give you a few seconds of thinking time. Is that a strong or a weak argument? This is known as the sunk cost fallacy. We've already thrown all of this money, we've sunk all of these resources into this project or into buying this thing, whatever it is. So we've got it, we might as well use it and suffer all of the problems and pain and suffering in doing so, rather than admit our mistakes and start again from fresh. Let's have a look at maybe another one. And again, we'll look at some different flavors or some different types of logical fallacies. So here we go.
The last 2 interns we hired from that country were underperforming. We should stop recruiting from there.
All right, yeah. So we've already hired 2 interns from country X, not performing well. Let's not pursue any more recruitment opportunities in country X. Such a bias and a sweeping statement that it's instantly visible that the strength of the argument is really weak. So these kind of hasty generalizations come up all the time at work, but often they come through so fast we don't actually spot them and identify them. Let's have this is going rather well. Let's have one more perhaps, and here we go.
You want to streamline the project timeline? So you're basically saying you don't care about quality, just getting things done fast.
Now, interesting. Okay, so you might recognize this type of logical fallacy from listening to politicians. So what's wrong with this sort of fallacy where somebody says, so, you're basically saying this, and that makes your argument break down. They try to misrepresent it in some way. They're missing out on the bigger holistic argument. They're creating what's called a straw man. Yeah, when you hear that phrase. So what you're saying is, and somebody simplifies something to such a degree that it completely misrepresents what your point of view is. So you can see that, in a session, we can really break down these and look for examples of these in our own businesses, in our own meetings. Where perhaps we're including logical fallacies in our arguments, or we're spotting them in other people. All right, I'm going to fast forward through a few of these because I'm conscious there's a couple of other things that I want to showcase today as well. But generally speaking, logical fallacies, again, broad sweeping statement. So, huge generalization here, but they tend to form into one of 3 families. There's either a fallacy of relevance, the argument behind the recommendation isn't really relevant to the ask, or there's insufficient evidence in there in the first place, or there's some sort of ambiguity where there's kind of a vague logic behind it, but again doesn't really pinpoint in and strengthen our argument. And again, there's all sorts of examples that we would explore in a workshop themselves. But I want to jump forward, if I may, with your permission, and I'm going to jump forward to having a little bit of fun where I'm going to put somebody else in the spotlight and I'm going to allow you to be the critics. Okay, so we have prepared a little bit of a poll for you, and we're going to ask you to decide between 3 different topics, and whichever one you decide in the poll, we're going to ask Vincent and Vivian to role play it. Yeah, so they're going to role play out an argument. We're going to listen to them as observers, and then we're going to break down the strength of their arguments and decide who wins. So let's quickly look at the poll. First one is well-being versus profits. So this is all about one party saying, well, it's all about employee well-being. Let's create a great working experience, and really engaged employees are going to create a great customer experience and drive our business forward. Versus profits, okay? It's all about the balance sheet. We've got to sustain the business, okay? So option 2 is all about remote working, topic that is really hot these days. Is it ultimately beneficial or detrimental to productivity? So Vivian and Vincent are going to roll out the pros and cons of us for us to judge. And the third is flexible working hours. So is the traditional 9-to-5 workday still relevant in our modern working age? Is there a business case to create a more flexible working environment for our team?
We've had 67 responses so far, and 28 are for well-being versus profits.
All right, so we're going to give you maybe a few minutes. We won't give you too long. I'm sure that if we had a full day, we were sitting around and you would be sat in the goldfish bowl, we're all peering in, we might give you 5 minutes or so to build your arguments, and then we can have some more time to reflect. But in this compressed kind of taster that we're creating today, yeah, I'll let you run for 2 minutes, 3 if you're really on a roll, and then I'm going to be rude and interrupt you if that's okay. As we're listening as observers to the arguments coming from both sides, from Vincent and Vivian, I want you to not just decide on which one that you would agree with, but look for some evidence that proves why one argument is strong, or perhaps why another argument might have some fallacies in there. Okay, enough from me. Okay, let's get the clock ticking. And Vincent, Vivian, no pressure. It's not like you've got 110 people observing. Yeah, so don't feel any pressure at all. I'm sure you'll be awesome. Okay, over to you.
No worries. Well, to be fair, if companies invest in well-being, that will automatically increase profits. It's quite clear, you know. And one of the things is, if you're going to have happier employees, right, they're more likely to have good ideas, right? If they have good ideas, they're going to be more innovative, which means better products and services, you know, better quality, which means happier customers. And if you've got happier customers, they're going to buy more, and that will mean more sales, which will mean more profits. And if they've got more profits, you'll be able to have more bonuses. And if you have more bonuses, then you're going to have happier, even happier employees. And if you have happier employees, you're going to have even more productive employees, which means even more sales. So, Vivian, I think you've got to be agreed with me that well-being is very important here.
Yeah, well-being is important, but what kind of well-being you are thinking about?
Well, what I would suggest, and what we've got very good stats that say that if you include an in-house massage therapist, you can increase productivity by 33%.
Okay, head massage. Everyone have a head massage every day.
Yes, you understand this perfectly. So I'm glad that you're with me in this.
Vincent, do you know like how is our economic performance or financial performance last year? And then do you know like how's the statistic or the predictor about the economy of the coming year? So like what we see is the profit, we need to be very cost cautious for the year. For sure, I care about the well-being of our employees. However, if we keep spending on money, like I had massages, like for example, $20 per person times 1,000 employees times 365 days or 200 days. So how much it costs, and then how much it will affect our economic performance or like financial performance, and then like how it will impact the bonuses as well. In that sense, do you think we should be more cost conscious and maximize our profit?
Well, we have actually already hired a massage therapist for the Singapore office. So why don't we trial it in Singapore, right? And see how it goes. And if it goes well, and I'm sure I've already demonstrated the effects of happier employees, you know, we can then roll it out in Hong Kong and China. How does that sound?
All right, I'm gonna pause it. I'm gonna pause it there, because I can see some rather interested looking facial expressions from people that have got their cameras on today. Okay, so let's just give everybody a moment to reflect and just to think back and consider, you know, how is that argument playing out, and how does that represent some of the arguments that play out at, you know, in your business? Is it the loudest and most excited person that gets agreed with, or is it the person that's perhaps more more measured and more thoughtful, and the one that's even asking questions. So be careful of the most excitable and loud voices as well, breaking down the logic of arguments. Wonderful. Okay, so no pressure for both of you. Well done for Vivian, and I'm sure Vincent, you'll be able to explain that in your end of your appraisal. But let's keep an eye on the clock. We've got 5 minutes left. And part of this is not breaking down the argument, but thinking about this bigger picture perspective of what we call intellectual humility. And this is this awareness of each of us has a worldview. We all have our own background and experiences and the knowledge and the that we've acquired over our own careers or our own work. And this has created our own points of view. We all have a different worldview. You may have a strong feeling that this is the right priority. I might have a strong feeling of that's the right decision to invest time or energy or resources. But intellectual humility is the ability to, although we feel passionate that we might have the right answer, being able to be humble and curious, and at least be able to pause for a moment, slow down, and engage that logical thinking, that slower thinking system in our brain, and to actually be able to, before we make a decision, understand the argument of the other side and actually be humble enough to say, could they be right? Is there a blind spot that I'm not seeing here? Is there something here that actually strengthens their argument that might win me over? And in doing so, I'm going to have to separate my ego from my answer, and really engage that logical part of the answer. So again, a huge area there that we can explore. And in order to think critically, we've got to be open to the idea that we may not be right. And if we really honest with ourselves, sometimes when we feel really strongly about a certain position on an issue, we have this almost emphatic insistence that we've got the right answer, and our job is to persuade the other person that's wrong. So part of critical thinking is to, before we jump into that, to slow down and actually really understand their argument, break it down, look at the relative strengths of the evidence, and think about might that impact our own point of view. So most people would say, I do think critically, but half of people that we speak to in our client meetings rate that their employees' critical thinking is below average, which is logical. On a standard distribution curve, it would be logical to think of, most people are going to be in the middle of that bell curve, and 50% is going to be distributed below average. So if you are curious about assessing your own critical thinking, please reach out to people in the Arcadia team, and we'll actually send you a more thorough critical thinking assessment. We had some fun with our 3 questions at the beginning of today's session, but we'll send you a more scientifically validated assessment. And not only will you get an opportunity to really look at some elements of your critical thinking, it might spark some ideas on how we can bring that to life to add value in your business. So got an eye on the clock. We've only dipped our toe in the water of our broader draw framework today. I do hope that we were able to leave you with at least an insight on your own habits around critical thinking, and maybe 1 or 2 tools to think about how arguments are constructed and some of the fallacies that might impact it. Now, if you do want to learn more, we will very much be happy to go into some of the details and all of the content that we could build into a full 1-day program. Or if you wanted to do something virtually, we can talk about that. If you wanted to run a shorter program, we can talk about which elements we might be able to include of the broader framework. And again, there's a QR code on screen here. If you are interested, or if you have any questions about what might it look like, how many people can I get on a class, what would a virtual session look like, how can I build it, just hit the QR code on screen, and we'll get back to you with some of those answers. Okay, so with 1 minute on the clock, I'm going to pass it back over to our hosts, and I'll let them kind of wrap up, and maybe I'll hopefully see you again in a training session coming up soon. Thanks everybody for your time. Back over to you.
Thank you, David. Really appreciate you giving some wonderful insights there. A couple of questions. When there's not enough time to think through some of the problems, there can be a knee-jerk answer, and they might be more likely to occur. So what would you suggest in such an instance?
Yeah, so often in those situations, if if the building was on fire, there wouldn't be time to sit down and have a debate over it. So this is perhaps where we can actually maybe work in advance to think about some of the dilemmas that we might need to face, and maybe build a playbook in advance, or at least be aware of perhaps some of the gateways in that decision. So if we reach a certain step of number of customer complaints, or if there is a breach in security on our online banking portal, we can have those gateways where we actually have the answers, or have at least some responses prepared in advance. Yeah, I don't know if that answers your question precisely, but being able to work on anticipating them, and at least building some frameworks in place can help in that kind of moment of truth when you've got to make a reaction.
So thank you very much, everyone. Looks like we've had some good feedback, so really appreciate you spending 1 hour of your time with us. Cheers.